Hey there, so today's video is going to be about the new Boba, Hero Boba. I wanted to get something out before Gen Con, which I'll be attending. So this video is going to be a little shorter than most of my deck guides. This is more of like a theory crafted version of the deck. I have played with it. I think it's pretty good. And it's different, unique. I think this isn't really a leader that gets talked about very much or even really played much. So I think there's some potential here, and I'd love to hear some feedback on it, some other ideas that you might consider for this archetype. Before we get going, if you don't mind, please just click that subscribe button. The like button helps a ton. Alrighty, let's go. So, why are we playing Good Guy Boba? So basically, this game feels to me like it's balanced a lot with math, right? Like the way the numbers work out is kind of masterful, actually, but there is this very linear progression of power through the curve. Different keywords on units affect the numbers on their health and on their power. And one such very important keyword, maybe the most powerful keyword in the game, is ambush. So if you look through the curve of units that have ambush, you will notice very clearly that the stats on those units are less than the counterpart, more vanilla units at that stat range. So what are we doing with Boba? Well, whenever you play something with a keyword, he gives it or something else, right? You don't have to give it to the unit that just came into play. But with ambush, a lot of the time, the point will be to give it to the unit that has ambush. And all those ambush units that were typically statted and balanced around one less power so that so that your 4-cost ambush can't just instantly kill their 4-cost unit, or your 5-cost ambush can't instantly kill their leader or something. Well, now a lot of that stuff can actually happen because of Boba Leader. So we pick him. Why are we going with yellow to combine with him? Well, that's where all the ambush is, right? Green, yellow hero is like ambush everywhere, down, up, left, right. So we're going to just jam a bunch of ambush, and we're going to try to gain board advantage with that. So here's the deck. It'll be linked in the comments below. It'll also have a sideboard. It's more of a maybe board right now, as this is still a work in progress, more of a theory crafted version. It's not going to be a 10-card sideboard. So we're going to break it down, and we are going to start with the ambush train. So this is the ambush, right? This is why we're playing the deck. We got Cloud Rider, and this is a massive get. It's not even just good for Boba Fett. This is actually probably the only ambush unit that I don't feel is actually understated, even without his buff. It can already basically trade with any important 2-drop unit that gets played. With Boba's leader, he can attack for 4, so he is going to trade up in some situations, right? This can kill 3 drops. It's obviously core. It'll also work really well with something like U-Wing reinforcements, which we will play because it will allow us to ambush twice in one turn theoretically, because it's cheap enough. It's the only unit that we can bring out of U-Wing reinforcements to combine with another ambush unit. So you can ambush twice on the ground, or once in the ground and once in the air with that. All right. At 3-drop, we don't actually have ambush. Sad, but we will be playing some other 3s to compensate. And then we get to 4. So at 4, we've got 1 in space, 1 on the ground. We're going to play the full set of each of them, the Liberator Gunship and the modded cohorts. Now, let's talk about the stuff that Gunship typically can't kill, right? Millennium Falcon, the 3/4, can't kill System Patrol Craft, Concord Dawn, any of the 3 health red rebel ships that get metal ceremonied sometimes before turn 3, so before you're actually able to ambush with this. So it's a good anti-aggro card, even kind of at its base, but when it can attack for 4, it does a whole lot more. Modded cohort. So another one that when you think about the stats, right, this ambushes as a 4/4, which is nice, but for 4 cost, it is not killing most other 4-cost units. unless they are things that are also pushed on the effects, such as K2. But at 5 health, at 5 power, whoa, this all of a sudden can take out so much more, including the plethora of 3/5/3 drops we now have, like Toro, the Boba unit, and Cassian Andor. And modded cohort can one-shot a Sabine Wren leader on the Sabine flip turn. So gone are the days of you needing to worry about not being able to answer her before she gets buffed. If you need to, you can pass a bit to let that Sabine player have to actually deploy resources before they flip her, so that you know you're safe from like a wing leader or a Darksaber. If they flip into your 4 resources, you can one-shot her, and if they don't, you can kill something else and then have your 5 power ambush coming up the next turn to take her out. So let's go up the curve now. Now we're at 5. So we've got Agent Callus, Syndicate Lackeys, and Marauder. So Agent Callus, you know, at 5 as a 4/4 ambush, he fell out of favor massively because it was just too late for a 4 cost, for a 4 power ambush unit. Now his ability is quite nice, right? When he could kill something and draw a card and still stick around, it was awesome, right? It was like a 2-for-1, sometimes 3-for-1 in value from him, but it just wasn't happening enough. Well, it's going to happen a whole lot more when he ambushes for 5. And with that token, we also play the Syndicate Lackeys because they can hit for 6. So Syndicate Lackey can one-shot almost every leader in the game when with Boba Fett's ambush, right? It can take out a Bosk, it could take out a Han, it could take out a Rey, it could take out a Leia. It already, you know, takes out Sabines and all the smaller leaders we're talking about. It does unfortunately not take out Boba Villain, but Boba Villain's 7 health is extremely pushed, so that's unfortunate. But Syndicate Lackeys is a really nice leader sniper in this deck. And we also play a couple of Marauders because we want to be able to ambush on ground or in space all up the curve. As you'll see on the next resource cost at 6, we can do it there too. Marauder can hit for 5. It also has this very fringe upside with the ramp. I expect this to go off very, very infrequently, but it can happen, and it's quite nice when it does because it immediately lets you deploy your leader. All right, at 6, Millennium Falcon and Enfys Nest. So we'll start with Falcon. This ambush is a 6. That's massive, right? We know Fett's Fire Spray exists. This can ambush a Fett's Fire Spray and trade with it. It can defeat a Ruthless Raider and trade with it. There's other units too that are a little more fringe, like the Clan Saxon Gauntlet, the Sentinel in space. But Falcon is just really nice to have access to, right? And key here, right? We've got from Gunship to Marauder to Falcon. We can ambush through the curve in space. We can do the same on the ground. We actually can go one further underground because we've got the Han, but it's pretty awesome. Enfys Nest, it's pretty good. It's like Syndicate Lackeys. It hits as a 6. It just basically always lives after you ambush with it because anything you attack with it is going to attack her back for 3 less. So unless it has 7 power, it won't kill her, right? 6 power units will only hit her back for 3, and you get to stick around. The fact that the next ambush units also get that effect is marginal. It also comes up very infrequently, especially when the next ambush unit is often a Han who doesn't take damage back anyway. So that's kind of why it's only a 2, because it's not really defeating anything bigger than what the previous row was already doing. And finally, Han the Master. So Han is awesome. At 7, he's absurd, right? When he hits for 7, now he one-shots the Boba villain, and he one-shots a Luke Skywalker unit or Luke Skywalker leader, right? There are 7 health units. That's a pretty big threshold in this game for safety, and Han now can take care of that for you. So Han's core, we know Han's already good. It gets played in other decks, and you're going to play 3 of them here. All right, so the non-ambush stuff, right? We didn't have enough, right? I could have played like 3 copies of all of those and then played like Mercenary Company also, but we need to fill out our curve, especially early on. So we're going to play 6 2/2 shielded units that also all trigger Boba's ability. They are pretty awesome. I love that Hero Green Yellow or Hero Yellow can play these guys, 6 of them. These are some of my favorite 2-drops. You got the Crafty Smuggler and the Elite. They're both basically 2/2 shields. Obviously, if you're going to choose to play one early, you'll play the Crafty Smuggler so that you can resource the other one and maybe pop it out of the resource row later. And it, has that capture rescuing upside. But basically, these shield stuff, it's great. You start with one of these, and on turn 2, you can play a 3-drop and buff your shielded unit, right? So that's another really important part of this Boba leader's abilities. You don't have to put it on these ambush units or on the unit itself when it comes in. If that ambush unit was already going to defeat something without the extra power, you throw that power on something else. And these shielded units are awesome targets for it because they're going to just one-shot the first play your opponent played and leave behind a body, right? Your opponent plays Battlefield Marine. All right, Crafty Smuggler. Next turn you play maybe Sundari Peacekeeper or Admiral Akbar or whatever. You buff your shielded unit, +1 attack. Now you got a 3/2 shield that can trade with, or not even trade, just defeat most other turn 1 plays that your opponent may have played. So we love these shielded guys, and we love that they can trigger the plus ability later in the game too. Akbar's also pretty nice here because, again, you're gonna a lot of times lead with a 2/2 shielded unit, which means being able to play Akbar, ping something, and then buff your shielded unit. You can defeat something all the way up to 5 health in that case, right? Let's say your opponent played a Boba Fett unit, 3/5. Play Akbar. When you have your Crafty Smuggler in play, you deal 2 to that Boba unit. You buff your Crafty Smuggler, who now has 3 power. That Crafty Smuggler now defeats that Boba unit. It's pretty awesome. The restore is also pretty relevant, and the fact that Akbar's power health is at 4 means that he can now carry Boba leader's buff later and actually attack as a 2/4, which is pretty relevant. Sundari Peacekeeper is another consideration. The 3-drop slot does not have ambush, so we need to play some other units. That's why we've got the Akbar and the Peacekeeper. We also have some resupplies that you'll see. So that's kind of what we're trying to do on turn 2, and then hope to catch up with our ambush train, right? The whole point of the ambush train is that all those units are going to be turning 1-for-1 trades, which a lot of time what they were normally doing, into 2-for-1s in our favor, because they will trade up and then leave behind a body. So Sundari Peacekeeper is a gap filler. It's nice to have restore against Sabine. It also triggers the ability, right, and can also hold the buff pretty well. So you play it, next turn you ambush with something, you buff it, it can now hit for 4, which is great. Bright Hope is another card that is just good in general. It's really nice to have a Space Sentinel. It does a lot of work here. Again, you can play it and self-buff it, so it's a 3/6 for the rest of the turn, meaning that all those A-Wings and Red 3s and whatever that may have been able to kill it and survive can't. You can then throw a buff back on it the following turn. Bright Hope is awesome. Very good chance I'd just end up wanting 3 of them in this deck. The upside that it kind of defeats bounties that someone might put on your unit is also really good. So Bright Hope feels pretty core. And finally, all the way up in the curve, we're just going to play Home 1. Home 1's awesome. Especially later in the curve, it can start bringing back ambush units. Now remember, it can only bring back heroic units. Unfortunately, it can't bring back a Cloud Rider, which I would love. So for it to bring back ambush units, you have to wait until 9 resources, because you need to be able to pay the extra 1 for the Liberator gunship or the modded cohorts. But even so, just playing it and getting back something, right, and turning all the units that hopefully you will have been able to get into play with all your 2-for-1s into restoring machines is really important, and it gives us a ton of long game ability, which is something I think may struggle with, because although this deck is very good at kind of just like defeating a bunch of units, it might struggle a bit more as these color pairs tend to into hard control decks. U-Wing and Home 1 are kind of your value engines that hopefully can help overcome that. All right, and now we'll talk about the events. So Spark of Rebellion is just awesome. It's another very good turn one play in this deck if we're not going to lead with Crafties or Leets or even our Cloud Rider if there's nothing to ambush. Spark is really nice. It is probably a really good anti-control tool as well. Just like seeing this in most games. Surprise Strike. Now, this is not a very aggressive deck, but what it does do is leave behind units a lot of the time that can then hopefully trade up. It's really good at knocking out leaders, right? You're going to ambush and leave behind like weak units, like a modded cohort, for instance, that has taken 3 damage. Well, with a Surprise Strike, that modded cohort can now hit for 7, so it can basically trade into anything. So it's nice to have access to this. It gives you a little bit of reach to important card. Resupply. So I tried Spark of Hope for a while in this deck because I was like, hey, I'm going to be ambushing and trading a bunch. Like, I'm going to just be able to trigger it. But the issue is with this deck is that we do kind of just play all our resources every turn on the next ambush in line. And it was just hard to squeeze it in. And what I really felt like I wanted to do is just ramp on turn 2. The turn 2 play tends to be the weakest one in this deck. You only see Akbar and Peacekeeper in the deck itself as units. Other than that, you would just be playing like a Cloud Rider or another shielded unit on turn 2, which is fine. Cloud Rider, because it's 4 power, is a pretty good turn 2 play because it can kill like 3/4s that your opponent might have played. But in a lot of situations, I just would have preferred to be like Resupply, and next turn I got like Lackeys, Callus, Marauder, like all the good stuff. So Resupply makes the cut over Spark of Hope. And U-Wing Reinforcement, you know, this card's great. It's great when you can basically dig for any ambush you might want. It's like you get to look at the board, you get to look at what the top 10 cards and be like, okay, this ambush is the right size to kill that unit, and then I'm also bringing in something else and just getting tons of value that way. And, you know, it's also going to find your Hans, which is awesome. So we're going to run that. And it's going to help a lot into like control decks because we need value. If we're not generating value with our trades because control decks don't care that much, then we have to find value somewhere else. All right, the last part I want to talk about is like some more theory stuff. Like this is my maybe board right now. It's just some stuff I'm looking at to try to fit in, whether or not it would be like purely a sideboard card. Like Bamboozle, there's just no way I think I would play it in the main deck, but it might be an interesting sideboard card. But Boba Fett's Armor is actually one that I think maybe we can try to get into the main deck. It's not as easy to get onto this leader as it would be in like the villain version because he costs 6, but you tend to be able to protect your leader pretty well in this deck because you can often just ambush before you flip. And then the follow-up turn, if you can land an armor on him, it can be quite strong. Mercenary Gunship is here because basically this deck is a little low on 2-drops. And I think it might just be the best other one. Now, it wouldn't trigger Boba's ability, unfortunately. But there really aren't very many other 2s that I thought were particularly interesting to play here. So maybe we go with that. Echo-based Defender. A decent defensive card. It's 3 health, has been unfortunate in a lot of cases because it just gets defeated by 2-drops, but it can come in and immediately pump itself into a 5/3, which I think is actually going to be more relevant later in the game when like the chaff has kind of already been removed from the board, so that your opponent might actually have to commit a real card into defeating it. Millennium Falcon, a powerhouse card that I wanted to put here mostly to talk about why I'm not including it. First of all, it doesn't trigger his ability, but it's more so the fact that I think I talked a lot about how this deck curves out and really just tries to be able to ambush and ground in space up the curve every turn, and playing behind the curve because you played a Falcon is really problematic. I think if you were going to play this card, it would probably be as a late game kind of deploy, either with U-Wing Reinforcements or Home 1 to push damage, and less so about an early play. If you did play it early, there's a very good chance you would just immediately have to bounce it back to your hand, which is okay in the cases where it comes in and defeats like an A-Wing. But I've opted not to include it. Bodhi Rook, this would be a pure sideboard card, something that could come out of U-Wing Reinforcements, specifically against control decks. It's a pretty power play to be able to go like Ewing, Bodhi plus a 4-drop, like let's say modded cohort. Bodhi, rip out the answer from your hand. You get a clean 3-for-1 with that play. Remember, Bodhi does not come out of home 1, which is unfortunate, but he still might be able to be a good inclusion out of the board. Spare the target. This is a bounce, right? So it's just some more interaction. The deck is interacting basically with all its units, but not so much with its events. And I think there is maybe a reason to try to fit this or Waylay into the deck. Tech would be, again, an inclusion purely for long game grinds. He does also have Smuggle, which is nice, which means because he will proc Boba's ability. Fennec Shand, you know, I think maybe including one of these just like as the 4th 7-drop ambush is solid. Han is basically just better. Like the one thing Fennec Shand can do that Han can't is like ambush massive things. If you've like got 4 different costs in your discard pile, she can now hit for 8, which when you're talking about the regular Han without the Boba buff only hits for 6. But here Han hits for 7, and there's very little we ever need more than that for, unless we see Darth Vader become an extremely popular leader, in which case she would be able to one-shot him as long as you got 4 different costs in your discard pile. But it's a pretty strong card, and certainly a worthy inclusion. And the last one is another giant space ambush. This card doesn't get talked about very much. I still think it's gonna show up somewhere. It's a 7/8 in space. It can ambush as an 8/8, which does mean it can defeat things like Avenger, trades with Avenger, and obviously can defeat anything smaller. It kills home 1 cleanly. It kills fire sprays. The issue here is at 8, if your opponent is just not playing space units, this is kind of not where you want to be, right? Like, you need it to kill something, or you're just playing a chunky unit that does nothing. The ramp on it is very interesting, although we're not really going much higher up in the curve. So outside of like home 1 being able to really bring in like some massive things, the ramp that this gets from defeating a space unit is not super relevant. But I think the card's pretty good, and I'm hoping to kind of see it work out for it. All right, so this is the whole list. That's a wrap for this video. Hope you check out the link, leave some comments in the comments below in the section, and then yeah, please subscribe. It'll help out a ton. And yeah, stay tuned for some stuff coming out after Gen Con. Hope it's a good time. It definitely will be. And until next time, take care.